Ernest Lefner.
Nick,
Good.
good to see you.
So great to see you. Always a pleasure. Always fun. Always look forward to like hanging out with you. So how
Yeah,
you doing?
good, good. The year's gone by so quickly. I can't believe Oneg Falls around the corner.
It is like so nutty, that we met what like 12 years ago, you
Yeah,
know, and it's like just scary how quick that time, flew by. I remember like once like, I was at a Burger King and my son was 8 years old and I'm holding his hand and I look down at him and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe it's been 8 years. That went by so quick. He's going to be 16 before I know it, and then he's going to be 32 before I know it. He's 33 now.
yeah. Well, you
He's
remember
like, yeah.
five, right? He turned 17 in a couple days.
Oh my God, how nice. That is like crazy. Well, I hope that you're able to bring him to Dallas. That would be super.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. He's getting into networking and cybersecurity now, so he's got a real interest in what's going on.
Yeah, apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Or straight down, as Carlos says.
That's Carlos Matos, everyone.
Yeah,
So, all right. So let's say, so I have a couple of, kind of talking points, and,
yeah,
but what I'm really kind of excited about, in this talk are a couple of different things. One is that everybody in the community knows you. Obviously, they know both of us. But it might be good just to give them a little bit of background, about because your journey over these last 12 years has been, you know, um, non-linear. Let's put it that way.
I was never one for the straightforward path.
Yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about your journey and bring everybody up to speed? Because I think the journey is really color, your experience and then, your perception. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I kind of came from a circuitous route, right? So just so folks know, I joined the military right out of high school. Spent 12 years in the Air Force, and then thought I'd have a medical career. After that was over, right? I
Mm,
became a registered nurse, and those things just didn't work out for me. I went on a deployment, ended up sick for quite some time, and when I was getting healthy, my father got me a job with a friend of his from Alcoholics Anonymous running cable. Pulling cable,
huh.
working in
Yeah.
manholes, right? So terminating, fiber optic cable and giant, 1800 pair telco cables and,
Yeah.
recabling the University of Albany and the New York State building system and all kinds of these crazy, crazy big jobs. And I
Mm,
loved it. It was just one of those things where the amount of effort you put in was the amount of satisfaction you got out of seeing a job well done. And one day I was doing a job, a university, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York. They had a bunch of laptops they were bringing in for all the students, but they hadn't thought about
mm-hmm.
where the students were going to use those laptops. So
Uh,
just 2 or 3 days before the school started for the fall, they called my company on the phone and said, "Hey, we need to build 24 labs out for laptop users. So
mm,
it's all got to be cabled, and we need you to do it in 3 days." So I took a crew of 4 guys, and we knocked out 24 labs. A few thousand network connections in 3 days, and
mm.
they were so impressed. They said, "Hey, if you come work at RPI, we'll teach you how to configure routers and switches, and in return, you teach our folks how to do layer one, which is really kind of a
Mm-hmm.
big deal for them. It was so expensive back then.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. What year was this about?
it's 1997.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was kind of like right in the beginning of like the internet boom, as well.
Right.
So we were kind of wiring up the nation, so it was really great, great time. Actually, wiring up the planet, so actually a really good time.
Yeah, we were a big outsourced contractor for an MFS back then. We were putting
Yeah.
fiber in the ground all over the place.
Hmm.
And putting in 4-inch conduit and trenching and all that stuff. It was crazy.
It's so funny, Aaron. It's like, I never knew this about, your background. So I did that. I didn't pull the wires, but I was about a decade earlier. So
Mm,
this is like the mid to late '80s. I was working at Digital Equipment Corporation, and I wired up the kind of Boston and the Boston suburbs area, going up to Merrimack with the largest private fiber optic network, probably on the planet. At that time. And so it was interesting in that like we both, had that experience of kind of layer one,
Yeah,
layering that stuff. And that was, yeah, that was a big project. It's like it saved us like, tens of millions of dollars. And, we built our own telephone network and we had our own data network and stuff. So
it's
anyway,
crazy.
continue.
Yeah, no, and really the rest of that is I think pretty common knowledge, right? In 2000, I ended up getting a job at Fidelity. I went away for 9/11. When 9/11 came back, my career just kind of exploded, right? I just was not afraid to work. I worked almost 3 years, 100 hours a week.
Wow.
Um, I
Mm.
remember getting my HR notification that I had vested at Fidelity. My 5 year vesting happened in 3.5 years
Oh my
because I had
God.
worked so much, and they did it by the timesheets and the hours that you worked. It was crazy.
Uh,
Um, yeah, and then of course you and I met in 2012, and I was working with Jim Davis, who was running all of the network at Fidelity, and we built this whole thing out. A lot of opportunities came and went and bounced all over the place. And then, and after we kicked off ONUG, I went to work at Bank of America, led the insourcing of HP, uh,
hmm
bringing the network back to Bank of America, the technical side of the insourcing. So building the architecture, engineering, and operations teams. There was a big group of us doing it, but I built the processes for how change management was going to work and how incident management was going to work. It was pretty amazing to really kind of experience that at scale, right? We
mm,
hired thousands of people in the first I'd say year and a half that I was there. It was crazy. It was absolutely insane. And of course,
mm.
ONA kicked off at that time, right? It kind of really grew
Yeah.
and grew and grew and exploded. And then my time at Bank of America came to an end, and I went to Ernst and Young, where I ran infrastructure resilience and infrastructure modernization and resilience for EY.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me, before you, I want to kind of bring it back to B of A. So one of the key things I thought that you had at B of A were like you had all the tools, so
yeah, I
talk a little bit
ran.
about that.
Yeah, I ran infrastructure over there, so I had not just the tools, but the development teams, the ITSM products, the services for software distribution, pretty much everything except for hardware operations, and
Hmm.
it was amazing, right? We had at that time my team was just under 1,000 people. I had
Yeah.
about 500 people working out of India and just under 500 people here back in the states, and yeah, it went for about a year and a half doing that. It really was during just after the official ITSM transition happened, and we moved from the old Maximo IT, IBM products over to BMC Remedy.
Uh, yeah. So that really important point, and we're going to come back to the whole tools thing. So, all right. So continue. Ernst and Young.
Yeah. Well, then Ernst and Young. I have a good friend of mine that works over at J.P. Morgan Chase and an original founding ONUG member, and he was looking for me to come over and help run risk at J.P. Morgan Chase. But
Uh,
Jeff Gray found out I was on the market. They had just raised a big round here at Gluware from Bain Capital, and he asked me if I'd come be the chief product officer at Gluware, and that's kind of how I ended up where I am on the vendor side, which has been a big trip for the last. I mean, in December it'll be 3 years.
wow. My God. In 3 years already. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nutty. All right. So, all right. Colorful career. It's amazing. Really kind of, I think everyone like in our generation started at layer one,
Thank God. It's a big deal.
yeah, and kind of moved up. But that was like, your B of A experience was like really, telling, just having that many people all focused around kind of like what kind of tools they're using, how to operationalize that, infrastructure, and keep it up and running. Now,
And they
B of
called it
A,
the cleaner, right? Because we did we eliminated, geez, I don't even know, 199 tools as well during that time.
uh, out of how many?
I don't remember what the total number was, but it was a huge reduction. You
Mm,
know, it was and I remember the headcount associated with managing that many tools was significant, and we
yeah.
were able to really kind of tune the organization for what we needed versus what people wanted. Right? We had tools where 3 people managed them, but they hadn't been logged into in 36 months.
Yeah,
It was
a good example of like I think lots of companies need to do this is like go back when you're doing a review process of the tools, especially now as we're moving into the AI era, is you got to go back to first principles. Like, okay, what are we trying to do? And what do we need? What don't we need? So
It's
um,
basic governance, right?
yeah, yeah, we need a garbage function, disposal function, you know. But anyway, so like, all right, so the transition to the supply side. So a lot of people do that, a lot of them do it successfully or not. I think clearly your transition was very successful. I think Harman Vanderlyn, from Onug, uh, has really done a good job making that transition, going back and forth as another example. But so tell me about like, all right, what was that like? Because when you're on the consumer side, it's a very different experience, right? Because like you have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like you're essentially James Walker said this, once. It's like, you are in essence like a king of a small country.
Yeah.
It's like, so you have this, massive budget, and so the vendors are always wanting to wine and dine and compliment you, and if you need something, you send an email, make a phone call, and boom, you're there. But then when you move on to the supplier side, all of a sudden it's like everyone forgets who you are. it's like it's like what happened?
It's I'm someone who prides myself not on where I've worked, but on the relationships that I've made along the way.
Yeah,
And I don't really care that I had a big job at this company or that company or anything, right? What I care is, I try to have a meaningful impact on the people's lives that I work with,
yeah,
positively. And so I wasn't really worried about that phenomenon, but I will tell you, it hit pretty hard. There were people who I talked with
uh,
regularly who I thought were genuinely my friends, right?
yeah,
And come to find out that, the minute I stopped having, a big job and a big budget, I really didn't mean anything to them. And that,
yeah, yeah.
it took me probably a good 6, 8 weeks to, as I was reaching out to people and trying to catch up and stuff, and realizing that people are really that's not, it's not everyone, right? But I would say that 20% of the people that I had a really good relationship with, they
Oh,
maintained that relationship right afterwards, but the
yeah.
other 80% was like I never saw them. That's not true. I would see them when they lost their job and they wanted me to help them find a
Oh my
new.
God, that is so common,
Yeah,
so common. Like all right, so you know, um, I haven't experienced that transition that you've talked to, but like you're not alone. That happens like to everyone, and no one's really prepared for it.
yeah,
It's almost like being a rock star,
that's right.
and then you come out with a really bad album, and no one wants to hear you. It's like you're kind of like you're done until you come back with another album. But yeah, it's like it's so odd. Like I might not talk to somebody for a long time, and then all of a sudden, they're there because they need some help around a job, and it's like, if I can help, I'll help, but it's like, it's that's a little bit, it's a little bit odd, to all of a sudden like where you kind of let the relationship, go, and then you're kind of there, in a time of need, and that's okay. Like I said, I'll help as much as I can, and I
Yeah,
always do, for
I do
folks who kind of
too.
reach out.
Um,
But
you know, I,
it's not a good look.
no, it's tough, and I mean, but I try to do the right thing by everybody, and in times of trouble, people need help, and you can't, at least my philosophy is that unless it's an impediment to myself, you know what I mean, then I'll do whatever I can to help them.
Yeah. Okay. So, what else in terms of the transition?
So,
So
I'll say this is going to be a neat one. You're going to like this one, right? No matter how high you go in a corporate empire, someone's always telling you what to do, right? Someone's always
yeah,
saying, hey, the CTO of commercial banking wants to grow top line credit card revenue by 10%, right? So you think to yourself, okay, as the business aligned technology person, I want to, I got to figure that out, right? So how many servers do I need? What kind of growth do I have? What does that forecast look like? And then you start wheeling and dealing, right? Okay, well, of course I can't grow all that infrastructure the way I want because there's cost restraints and blah, 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 right? So how do I work the developer to come up with what the real, the development team to figure out what the right what the right amount of infrastructure is, and then make sure that infrastructure is ready, right? And when
yeah,
I spent 20 years, 25 years, operating that way. And so when I went to Gluware, the biggest shock was, I work for Jeff Gray, the CEO, and he is a fantastic leader, just one of the best guys I've
mm,
ever worked worked with,
Yeah.
and I would go in and say, okay, we got to do, here's my recommendation. We got to do this, and this, right? And he would be like, okay, go do that.
Mm.
I'd be like, okay, and a week or so would go by, check in, like, hey, how's that going? I really liked all those ideas you had. Where are they? And I'm like, well, like, what's the governance system? Like, how do I get budget approved? Like, I'm still trying to work that out. He's like, Ernest. I said yes.
I know.
And
It's
so,
streamlined governance.
yeah, that idea that not the idea, but the realization that really the entirety of my destiny and the product line for the company that I'm working for is 100% in my hands, right?
Mm.
And the only person that's slowing down the ability to make change and develop and grow is me, right? And that is
Yeah.
a huge like mountain to get over the top of, right? Because you're
Mm.
so used to somebody providing you that direction. So it was like, oh, I'm totally free now. Like
Yeah.
whatever I put on this paper is me. I own this. I drive this, and no one's going to tell me no. It is incredibly liberating. I
Yeah.
absolutely love that about this job.
Mm. Yeah, that's awesome. It's almost like there is that both the liberation of it, but also too like when you have individuals who've been in large companies, and so they're used to like all of the the attention from the vendor community, but they also figure out how to hide,
Yeah,
in large organizations, and so like when you're and you can still do that, like and plenty of people hide in Google,
sure.
and also at in other companies, as well. But I think like when you're in a company that's growing fast, like Glue is, and you have a senior position where you're reporting into the CEO, yeah, you got responsibilities, and it's like you got to make stuff happen, and you have the responsibility and the authority, to
Yeah,
make it happen, and that could either be liberating, as you said, and empowering and exciting, or it could be frightening.
right,
It's like, oh
right.
my god.
Well, I've never been afraid of taking a risk. You know what I mean, and going where
Yeah,
people don't want to go. So
yeah,
yeah, I've just it's kind of addictive, right? I when I think about potentially what my next step is, in my career and where I might end up. Like I don't want to go back to a bank. I don't want someone who doesn't understand anything about what I do, trying to guide and grow the infrastructure component. So I'm excited. The future is it's looking really good. And
yeah.
Gluware's just been an amazing company. I can't tell you how wonderful it's been.
Oh my God, it's been like in the right spot, especially now. And we're gonna get to that. So one thing in your role right now, you talk to a lot of of your customers, a lot of consumers.
Yeah,
So are you seeing like a repeat problem? Like are there like three problems that you're seeing? Doesn't matter which industry sector it is, but these are kind of like these are the three big ones that I'm constantly being asked to comment on or solve.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to terrify you when I tell you this, right? It's the same kind of five problems that everyone has, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody says, "Oh, I've got automation. I manage my network, blah blah blah." But the short answer is, very very few companies are, right?
Yeah.
Just about everybody, except for minor exception, is some sort of automation effort up and running, but it's small and very task based oriented, right? And so
Yeah.
we ask the basic questions like, "Hey, what do you have in your network?" Especially in this era of IoT, right?
Mm.
Like, what's on your network? What's your
Yeah.
inventory look like, right? And people will, say, well, we've done some M&A, we're not quite sure or whatnot, right? And that's really how the vendors take control of the situation, right? If you can't guarantee within a certain accuracy what your inventory is, then there's really not a lot you can do or a lot of trust you get in the remaining pieces of the conversation, right? So then once they realize that their inventories, they're not really sure what that is, and the number of people that have that problem is staggering, for the record,
Hmm.
right? They've got an Excel spreadsheet that's their best, most accurate, list of devices. And then second, they have absolutely no idea how far they've drifted from what the gold standard is, right? And so when you're seeing
Mm.
these outages that are happening, they're happening almost exclusively because of change, and that change is failing because there's a perception of what should be out there, and then there's what's really out there, and then there's the dichotomy between those two that causes
Mm.
a lot of the FUD out there. And
Hmm.
so that's constantly a problem, right? And then now, okay, maybe they might know what's going on, but remediating those kinds of problems at scale is very difficult. And,
Yeah.
if you've got 10 different types of devices running 10 different types of OSs and you want to do set port enable, right? That's 100 scripts for set port enable that you've got to manage at scale. And then all of our customers that come to us are just like, hey, we have a do-it-yourself effort. It's just not going to scale. It's not going to meet the needs of our business, and we need someone to help us get there. And I think the big problem the industry has is it's so accepted to fail at automation
Hmm.
that people will have a huge cyber event, right? Or
Yeah.
they'll be years behind on their patching and their remediation, and they'll go to their boss and say, oh, it's going to be 3 to 5 years for me to spin up an automation effort in order to fix this problem. And the short answer is, how is that acceptable? Right? Like, how,
Yeah.
if you worked at a major bank and you knew that you had revs of OS running your private equipment that was 10 years plus old, you know what I mean? Like, that would terrify you. And there's this implicit, permission to not do your job correctly because this self-build automation problem is so hard and cobbled together. And then the last big
Hmm.
was really, it's just patching management, like I hinted at, right? The number of people
Yeah.
who are so far behind on their infrastructure patching, and it's kind of a farce, Nick. Right? I can walk into a company and roll the dice, and 80% of the time it's going to be disarray, and 20% of the time there's going to be some varying scale of we realize what the problem is, and we've either solved parts of it and are happy with what we've done,
Yeah.
or we have a plan to solve parts of it and we are happy with what that plan is, even if that plan is going to keep them in significant cyber security risk for years to come.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, all right. So let me feed this back to you, and I think I got more than three. I think I got close to five. But it's lack of automation, still spreadsheet kind of like automation. At the end of automation that they might be doing, or very task oriented, kind of light scripting, kind of
Yeah,
task. I think that's one. The second is like lack of inventory of really actually what's on the network, and especially as you move into IoT, where the number of devices like increase by a couple of orders of magnitude. So not knowing actually exactly what is on the infrastructure that you're managing. The third one is drift, right? So it's like if you have configurations that you're especially configured for compliance, for regulations. Okay, how much of those, how much have you drifted out of that? And so not, kind of not knowing about that. And then what was the other one? Remediation. So like, okay, once you're out of drift, or out of compliance, it's like, okay, well, how do I remediate that? How do I get all
yeah,
that back, back together? So that, it's so interesting because it's so, you know, um, orthogonal,
yeah,
to, what we, you know, and I think, frankly, that's why we started ONU in the very, very beginning,
you got
is because there's, like our industry is not uncommon like any industry. We're probably just like every other industry, is that the vendor community has very large marketing dollars to get their message out. But the consumers don't. They have zero.
right, right,
And they don't, and they don't have a voice, to kind of aggregate that. And then, and that creates actually, that's kind of a dysfunction, in the industry, because it's like, one IT team might be like, consuming all this stuff that's coming up on social, or that's like, wherever they, get their the updates. And they might be thinking, oh my God, we're so far behind.
yeah.
It's like, what do we got to do?
You know,
Where
there's a
they're not.
delusion out there where people don't measure themselves on what they've accomplished. They measure themselves on what they want to accomplish, right? And
Mm, yeah,
when I first started, I would ask people I knew really well, like, "Hey, how's your automation effort going? How can I help you?" And like, "Oh, we're gonna build it. We're gonna do this and that." And 3 years later, right, the response is still exactly the same, right? And
yeah,
and I go in and tell them, "Hey, I can give you 80 to 85% of what you want. I can have it up and running, fully automated, end to end, self remediating automation in 6 months." Right?
yeah,
We can have the basics up and running in 4 weeks.
yeah,
And they're like, no, no, I'm going to build it. It's like, well, it's been 3 years, and you're still talking about what you're going to do, not what you've
yeah,
done. And
yeah,
then I think to myself, like, how is that okay? Like, who's allowed to do that at their company, right? All these things are just not getting done for these huge periods of time. And we're
Mm.
talking, we're going to slide to AI here, right? If you can't get the basics of infrastructure management and automation correct over a span of 10 years, right? How do you
Yeah.
think you're going to get AI right?
Yeah. I know. It's like, it is really, really crazy, how there is like such this large disconnect, out there. And the one thing that whenever someone talks to me about like, we built our own automation rocket ship, I'm like, there's no friggin' way you did
Listen,
that.
there are a couple
There's no
gold
way.
nuggets out there. There really are.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well, yeah. Hyperscale companies. Yeah. But like, I mean, like in the large enterprise, there might be
I
a
mean,
few, but
yeah, there's a handful. In the 3 years that I've been out there, there have been a handful who basically said this was our mission, and they've
mm,
accomplished the mission, right? But if you're betting, don't take that bet, right?
yeah. Well, I remember, like, actually, we were in London for like the second ONUG where Bank of America hosted us, and James Walker gave a presentation and said, I spent about $1 billion on our automated robot and it failed.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, it's like, it's a non trivial thing. And I think, so, you bring up a really good point. So, as let's kind of segue into like, AI, and it's that it's, sorry, my mind is kind of, concatenating a couple of different thoughts. One is that Sony at the last ONU gave her keynote, and in her keynote, one of her messages is that you got to clean up your infrastructure first. You really got to clean this thing up. You got to do what you did at B of A
yeah.
years ago in the tools and get the garbage disposal out and start cleaning up that infrastructure, not only on the tool side, but also on the devices that are in the infrastructure.
You
Because
know what? It comes down to the data. It really
yeah,
comes down to the data, right?
yeah,
These tools house monstrous amounts of data.
yeah,
Some of it's critically valuable and some of it isn't, right? So you've really got to understand what is the data you want to run your business by, and then what is the supporting infrastructure and tools that supply
mm,
that data. And then
yeah,
there's a service layer that large enterprises build. It could be ServiceNow, it could be their own service layer, et cetera. And that becomes the shim by which IT services are, managed, provisioned, you know what I mean, data's managed, et cetera. You've got to have a good strategy for those basics, or else the wheels are
mm,
going to come off the bus, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like I think the whole data governance piece is like so fundamental and so important. It's like I think it goes hand in hand with the kind of garbage disposal function. It's like you got to clean
Yeah.
this thing up, and you got to also like put in data governance. And so like we have so much telephony that's coming off of all these devices, now. And yeah, there are like there are different schemas for that for that telephony, and so but we can do translators, and we can kind of normalize
Yeah,
that
100%.
data, you know. So I think that could be done. So I think maybe so I think one thing which is unfortunate because it seems like what we're saying is that you know in the large enterprise to start your AI journey and your maturity map, is that you got to first clean up house. That's the first thing, and you got to like then also put in data governance guardrails, around what you want to collect and how you want to collect it. Um, then what? What are you thinking?
Oh my, that's this is where things start to spiral sort of the complexity up significantly, right?
Hmm.
So from an industry perspective, what I see is that uh, people are really looking at how do I manage the data, the data itself in a very, I don't want to say infantile way because that's not appropriate, right? How do I take the right kind of baby steps? So they'll say like, hey, I'm going to feed the AI engines all of this data so they can regurgitate documentation, answer questions, or maybe give me a sample RFP, or do you know what I mean? Like just some
Yeah.
basic like low risk stuff. And you're seeing that sort of proliferate across the board. And for me, building a product around, infrastructure services and the network specifically, I don't want to just be one of those people that generates documentation, right, and answers questions. Yeah, are we doing that? 100%, right? We're going to be starting early field trials here shortly on technology, but it can't just be that, right? The Gluware platform already writes code 10 times faster than if you had to write it on your own, right? To deliver automations 10 times faster. What
Hmm.
if for the scripting you had to do, you know what I mean? We just used Copilot to do that for you,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
then if you want to script with our platform, you don't have to. Now all of a sudden you've got this big accelerator, right? And
Mm.
those trials are going really, really successful. Like we are super happy with the way that's coming out right now. And
Yeah.
then when I sat down with the management team here, I was like, listen, if we're going to tackle this AI problem, I'm thinking my vision is like Starship Enterprise, right? And you've seen this in our demos at ONUG, right? I don't just want to get data from the network. I want to change the nature with which you interact with the network. Right. I
Yeah.
want to leverage all of that platform of automation, and I want to turn that into a mechanism by which you can sort of run the whole network, right? And the demo we had in the spring was a great one. It was like, hey, show me all the devices in the Dallas region that have high vulnerabilities. Okay,
Yeah.
of those devices, how many of them have code that remediates that vulnerability? All right, go ahead and run that code at Saturday at 10 o'clock. Right,
Yeah.
that's game changing from an AI
Yeah.
perspective. And we're going to have another demo coming up around not just the code writing piece in the fall, but also on how to do discovery and dynamically update your CMDB, ServiceNow, or like Netbox, all through verbal commands, right?
Yeah.
And that's taking AI to the next level. And now that's where all the challenges. I think that's where we need to be learning from one another, because the hard part there wasn't asking it what to do. The hard part was building all the models and having all the data ready so that it can answer the question properly. Because,
Yeah.
like with AI, you learn it's not just the questions you ask, but all the variations of the way you don't want to ask that question, right?
Yeah.
Because they get
Mm.
it wrong. One of the funny things that happened, Nick, was when you asked, like, hey, are there code versions that are available? Sometimes there aren't, but the AI engine
Mm.
doesn't want to tell you that.
Yeah.
So it will
Yeah.
make up an answer, right? Well, you don't want to make up an answer when you're rolling code to a device on a Saturday, right? So, these are the kinds of problems that have to be solved systemically before we productionalize the technology.
Yeah, it's like I'm a Deadhead, and so like in the '70s, I spent a lot of time going to Grateful Dead concerts, and so I know what hallucinations are, So so it's like, yeah, no, I understand, I totally understand, hallucinations, in AI. But there's also another thing, with this is that I think what you're kind of trying to build, and maybe what you guys are building, is kind of a large network model, right? So it's like, we have large language models, for English speech
You're
and
absolutely
coding, but now it's like we need to understand the language, that machines are talking, and particularly networking. So it could be any kind of device, but I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense, and that's the translation function, right?
yeah.
So it's like you can have multiple different vendors in there, and I think that's, see, when people are building their own, platform, I think this is really where there's a vast difference. It's like you have a platform, from Gluware and others that are in this marketplace, but like you guys have the experience of seeing all these different companies, and what their experience is and what their implementations are, and that stuff gets rolled into the product, at some point in time. All those translators, all those modules, that
You're
allow you to
absolutely
have. Yeah, it's like those. That's really, it's a big fundamental difference. And is this really strategic, for you to go off and do? It's like everyone is working on that problem. Everyone being consumers are working on that problem, and it's really not in your best interest to work on that problem. You really, especially if you guys are going to be doing a discovery protocol, going to be showing that, then there's the inventory issue. And then it would be really nice if there was like a digital twin. And you're probably already working on that, so that when it came to like Saturday, that you want to, okay, do this upgrade to kind of take care of the drift or do remediation, you can actually see what it's going to look like, before you actually, flip the switch and have it do it. But I think, it's like, but you're moving in that right direction. Is that okay? We have disparate data types, so you can actually put now governance, in place. You can discover all the devices, that are out there, and then you can interact, with that model. I love the Copilot, that collaborative, function with
yeah.
Copilots. It's like it's an extremely useful, AI tool.
But
So,
you've actually nailed it, Nick. I should bring you along on the sales kickoff with the customers, right? Um,
well,
you know, what differentiates us from everybody else out there, what makes Gluware unique is that device interaction and automation layer. We call it dial, right? It's the fact that we support the 51 operating system over 21 vendors, right? You don't have to
Mm.
write those scripts because we do. So you're worried about the outcome of the automation, not, what the Python code needs to say. So not
Yeah.
only does that accelerate your journey, but it puts us in a unique position, just like you're saying, right? We've seen every vendor, right? We've seen all the different permutations, right? We understand what those components look like. We know how to construct a data model that
Mm.
supports all of those components, right? Now,
Yeah.
now what AI is taking not just the data model of the devices, but the data model of the process of execution,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
And then building that into a framework that can be executed as well. And I think that gets lost, along the way. People think like, oh, well, I've written a bunch of scripts, I can just connect those together. It's like, well, no, it's a lot more than that, right? AI needs to fundamentally understand the processes you need to execute, warts and all, in order to interpret and make the right decisions. And that, we have a great guy, Stanislav Miskovich, who's one of the head data scientists over at Splunk that came over, and we talk
Mm.
about these kinds of problems all the time, right? It's
Yeah.
how do we kind of overcome, the complexity of the way we execute and get that included in the models as well. And that is not easy to do. If you don't have the right kind of expertise that's pushing those buttons and helping to understand how to build those models, like you're at the whim of just some guy in his basement that contributes something to the open source, right? And that's
Yeah.
terrifying.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like it. So the execution of this is clearly, key, because like if that gets messed up, it's like, oh my god, that's talk about a bad day.
Well, and what
It's
happens
like,
if Nick, ONUG builds their own training component, right? In order to train AI, right? Your own algorithm, et cetera.
mm,
What happens, right? Have you prepped your AI environment to have the data and then train the models, right? Or are
mm.
you the model itself? In which case you can't be nimble when technology changes. Like there's a lot of complexity there that a lot of people don't really think about.
Yeah, but for sure, especially like in larger complex networks, which you have a lot of experience with, because like even going back to B of A, so it's like B of A would have been what, like the eighth largest service provider, in the
Yeah, I
U.S.
think they said back in the day, it was when I was there, was the fifth largest service provider. It was 65,000 routers and switches, right? And I
Yeah,
managed the infrastructure components, right? We had 250,000 servers, 450,000 virtual servers, right?
yeah,
You needed to be able to put a patch out in 24 hours to almost 500,000 devices. Like it was crazy.
yeah. Well, scale, and I think that that experience and that knowledge is getting kind of programmed into these products, which is like
Mm.
super. Okay, so then how are you thinking? So I think AI. So let's think about AI transforming tools. In particular, right? So it seems like in the model that you were just talking about, some of the tools can stay. But like their outputs, might be fed into kind of a training model. And so that you can now actually do automation. Are there other thoughts that you have around AI tools and how
Dude,
that will change? Okay, yeah.
I think I'm sure some people have figured this out. For some others, this is going to be kind of a brutal wake up call, right? If your products and services revolve around data and the transmutation of data, right? Think observability, right? All
Hmm.
observability does is collect and present data, right? Like I think your days are numbered. I really do,
Mm.
right? I think the differentiation there is being able to take action,
Mm.
right? If you're a company that's out there and all you do is aggregate data and build dashboards and tell people what's wrong, like AI is going to do all that for you. It's just a matter of time. It might be 10 years, it might be 18 months, right? But at some points in time, there's going to be a reckoning around that, right?
Mm.
And then what will emerge is the companies that have focused on how to take action based on that data,
Yeah.
not just human determined, but system determined action as well. Those are the ones that are going to emerge, right? Because right now we have this brain that we're building, but the brain's not connected to a body yet, right?
Mm.
And once the brain matures, you're going to start connecting it to body parts. Those body parts are going to want to do things. And
Mm.
that's where the next big frontier, I think, in AI is gonna attach, which is how do you do the integrations with the AI components? How do you take action based on the insights that they're generating, and you do it in a fast and safe manner?
Yeah. It's interesting. It seems like there is such a gap, from what people are doing today, um, to what they should be doing and what the tools are evolving. And I'm not quite sure and there's a gap around skill sets as well. So what closes that gap and what gets them on an automation train? Is it competitive pressure? Like, they're all of a sudden seeing, their competitors in the marketplace starting to like outrun them. It's like, is it just lifestyle? They're able to like, not be as stressed all the time. Is it, just satisfaction, within their own organization, that they're a well-run organization? Is it just plain old ROI, that they can get a return on this, and so both in terms of capital cost and operational cost, of it. So,
I mean, I think it's all of the above, right? I think that the most important way to have the discussion comes down to maturity, right?
mm,
The maturity of people, the maturity of process, the maturity of the business, right? To be able to look at the infrastructure stack and say, or not the infrastructure stack, to be able to look at your IT as its own component of the business, set objectives on how that part of the business is going to enhance whatever it is you deliver to your customers, right? Whether
mm,
it's, whether it's making sure your bank accounts can be read at Saturday, at 2 o'clock, or whether you're making a vaccine, right? In a manufacturing facility, there needs to be a clear understanding of what those business outcomes need to be. And and I think that's the big dichotomy that's happening today. I think for a lot of
mm,
companies, there are a couple of smart people who come in and say, I'm going to go do X, Y, and Z, and they make a difference in a small area like cloud, right, or compute. And then the companies look to replicate that success with people who aren't the same, without the same objectives, et cetera, and they struggle to make progress in that area. And that sort of gives people this concept that it is what it is and it's not changeable and it's not morphable. And
mm,
ultimately, all the things you described are interpretations of the way business would add value, right? Whether it's
right.
financially, time to market, et cetera. And they've got to really understand that problem, right? Maybe it's risk, right? Maybe there are problems that are hiding that they're worried are going to cause outages, right? There's, everything from ROI to risk on that spectrum needs to be a well thought out plan. And I would say, from my experience, if you're a senior executive, a CTO, CIO, right, it is your responsibility to set that plan.
Yeah.
And it's not okay to fail. It's not okay to be 3 years behind on your vulnerabilities, right? That's how people get hacked, right? That's how horrible life-changing events happen. And I guarantee you don't want that on your resume, right?
Yeah.
So it's not okay to set mediocrity. It is okay to look at your organization and say, maybe we need help, right?
Yeah.
Maybe Ansible out of the box for us isn't the right answer. Maybe I should buy something that's a little more structured and capable, or maybe I should look for labor help, or do you know what I'm saying? There's a variety of different ways to solve the problem from telephone to mainframe, right?
Yeah.
And they all don't have to be the same method. Do you know what I'm saying? What needs to be built is a well thought out plan that aligns to business objectives, and the strength to be able to say that you're not going to accept mediocrity or the way things have always been done. And that's really, that's the hard part to overcome, is that impetus in the organization to not change, right? That stagnation based on, I've worked here for 30 years and I've never done it any differently, right? And I'm not just speaking about Gluware here. I'm really kind of speaking of infrastructure at scale, across the board. You've got to be able to say, I set these objectives. They didn't follow through with them. I need to find someone who can, or I need to, go to the vendor community, or do you know what I mean? I need to go to a partner,
Yeah.
someone to drive that level of effort. Because here we are 10 years later, and we haven't moved the needle in any way, shape, or form in some of these key areas. And that failure is starting to significantly affect the ability to make revenue. We were at Cisco Live in January, so I will use a network specific one. And that failure to drive automation, that failure to bring consistency,
Yeah.
costs companies 9% of their revenue.
That's
9%.
massive. That's massive.
How is that okay?
Yeah.
Those aren't our
Yeah.
numbers, right? These are statistics coming from the consultant community to get people to start thinking about change.
God.
It's
Yeah. Depending upon the
great.
industry, it's like, obviously on the gross margins, it's like, what does that mean in terms of capitalization? That's a significant number,
That is a huge number. And like, if you
yeah.
think about, IT might be consuming anywhere from 8 to 20% of every dollar that's generated in revenue. And to just
Hmm.
take 10% of that, 9%, just throw it out the window is crazy.
Crazy. Well, I wonder, like, Ernest, as you were, explaining, I wonder if like the big squeeze is going to be on pretty soon. So, and what I mean by that is that you have, we've been talking about AI primarily in the infrastructure, but there's also, and a bigger issue is around system of records, right? CIOs have always been kind of focused around their system of records ecosystems, whether that's in
Yeah.
HR, whether that's in finance, or whether that's in manufacturing, what have you. And there have been big ecosystems, around those. Like, it's on sales, obviously there's Salesforce and HubSpot and many others. And those processes which we operationalize business are deterministic, right?
Yeah, right.
And so the big move in AI is to make that more dynamic and more predictive, right? And this will take time, but like all of the like your past experience at Ernst and Young and PwC and all of the other kind of system integrators, like this is their new their new train, to kind of like, ride. And that's in essence to rethink, reimagine, how we operationalize businesses with AI to make those systems of records, more predictable. And like in one, the thing that kind of clicks and the light bulb that comes on my head is that, okay, well, can you, all across your business, can you then create a true digital twin of that business? And then, so from an executive management and from a board point of view, you can make these decisions, these policy changes, and actually get a predictive analysis based upon the data that's truly in there,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's running your business to see, okay, well, how this is going to change. So, what that is going to happen? We're not there yet, but that the wheels are freaking spinning, on there. So that's a total top down side of things, and then on the bottom up side of it, it's okay. Well, that will kind of force down into like the IT and into the infrastructure piece is that you've got to create a different infrastructure now that is more collaborative and that is more dynamic with the applications. And it's got to be a different relationship between what the applications are requiring and what the infrastructure is giving. And you got to get out of the way of people on with hands on keyboards. It's got to be automated, the orchestration of that, the observability, of that. And so it seems like to me is that if you're already on this path around automation, you're going to be so far ahead of the game. If you're not, then you're going to be, scowled upon. It's like, hey, listen, we have a strategic initiative, massive strategic initiative in this, in this corporation to kind of move us to a much more predictive model, an AI enabled, corporation. You need to get this infrastructure, changed so it's dynamic and automated. I think that's, to me, at a higher level, I think that's the big change agent.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
gonna happen.
Which it's funny. I try to break things down into the simplest of concepts, right? AI is
So that was too complicated.
no, no, no,
It's
no.
just-
But I'm going to almost do it comically. Like, let's bring
uh,
it to the cartoon level, right? You know,
no,
if you've got data and you manage data, which is pretty much the entirety of
everybody, yeah.
right, and then you have processes that you use to execute an outcome based on that data, right? And that outcome needs to be an action that needs to be taken. AI is going to be there, like it's almost there now,
Mm,
right? And if you're the entirety of your life is wrapped up in the data and getting to the insight, the outcome of that data, it's gonna be a bad day for you, right?
yeah.
Whether you're running a service desk and you're monitoring applications, right? Or whether you're looking at whether or not people's debt to income ratio on a mortgage form is correct, right? They're
Mm,
going to spit out an activity, and then that activity is going to be expected to be automated. And And if you're that person that's running the mortgage and you go to your boss and say, "Oh, I've just I've got 10,000 applicants. I've got to write a script now. It's going to take me 6 months in order to get it right, and I need to validate it in order to get there to build the automation." You're going to get punted out of that organization faster than you can blink an eye, right? So I think it's really that first wave is, how do I get the brain made? How do I build the brain for the tasks that matter to me in my business? And then the next piece is, how do I plug into a system, a platform of automation that can take action,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that automation, I say that in aggregate, right? It could be, what color is the traffic light, right? That I'm looking at, right? It could be, how do I get mortgage applications approved, right? How do I get, coupons sent to the printer and, so people
Mm.
can pay their car loan at the end of the month, right? Pretty much that, anything that has to do with that back end insight, and process generation, that's all going to disappear.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, we're both saying for sure the same thing. And, so I think then let's think a little bit about some of the kind of categories, that people can start to think about. And I think, maybe after that, we might be kind of running out of time. But there are AI agents,
Mm-hmm.
right? And these agents, do a task on behalf of, you. There are co-pilots, and I kind of view co-pilots as a collaborative AI tool where you can be
Yeah.
interacting with a device, with a co-pilot, and before you take action. And then there are tools that can enhance, automate, tasks and processes. And then there are kind of native AI products that are coming up into the marketplace, like Cisco's Hypershield is a good
Yep.
example of that. Tom Gillis did a great job explaining that, in Dallas. So, did I miss anything, or are those kind of like the major kind of
Well, I think
categories?
that makes sense certainly for our world. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, any opinions on any of these? Like, which ones are more helpful than the other, or is it these are just the new tools in the toolbox that you're gonna need to use?
I think this is our first real, I don't know what the right word is for it. The first real go to market, right? With the first generation of trying to make AI valuable in a, I don't want to say generic, right, but in a targeted sort of way, right?
Mm,
And so I think a lot of people are underestimating the complications that they're going to see and related to how these tools are being brought to market.
mm,
So I think a couple things. First, take it with a grain of salt first, right? A healthy dose of skepticism is always in order, right?
yeah,
Um, Look for people who have realistic solutions to common problems as a part of what they're selling, right? Think of it like a staircase, right? You got to start, on the bottom step to get to the top step. You can't just sort of show up one day and talk about how great it's going to be at the top of the stairs, because no one's going to believe you, right? And
yeah,
some of the folks that, some of the things that you've talked about have kind of been like that a little bit, right? It's been like, we're going to solve world hunger. We don't know where we're going to get the seeds. We don't know what the ground is going to be. We're not sure we have a rake, but we're going to solve world hunger with AI, right? And so if they
yeah,
don't have the fundamental building blocks to do what they say they're going to do, and they haven't built a track record for being able to deliver on those fundamental building blocks, what's the chance they're going to be able to build AI on top of that? So I think that's the first one. And then the second is, there's some companies out there that are super well positioned, right? They have really done well with those building blocks, right? They've taken the kind of baby steps, right? And I think that those are the ones where you're going to see the early successes. And then there's going to be a bit of learning that's going to happen over 18 to 24, maybe 36 months, where they look at those first set of tools and they learn what's going well about them and what's not. And that's going to kick off a whole bunch of innovation in the next round. And I
yeah,
think that
mm,
that next round is where we're going to really see the special things hit the market, right? Where people have thought about the fundamentals, they've built the fundamentals, and now they're not just talking about a grand vision, but they're talking about all the things that they learned along the way that helped them achieve that vision. So you're going to feel a sense of honesty, believability, et cetera,
mm,
as a part of that story, and that's really what I'm looking forward to, right? Because I think we're still in that proof of concept phase almost, right? People are bringing light products to do a little bit of experimentation. And the question is, how is this now going to evolve, right? And I think that next line of evolution is really going to be what's impressive.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really great perspective. It's like it's just don't think in the next, like, 3 to 6 months. Really, just think about this in terms of business cycles. We're in the beginning of a new business cycle around AI, especially within our industry, and we know that the infrastructure's got to change. Whether that is kind of the top down discussion we just had, or it's just the plethora of AI workloads that are going to come at us. And it's not just the monolithic ones that we were talking about, like whether that's drug discovery or whether it's cancer research or it's self-driving, what have you. But it's just the horizontal applications, so it's like, your social media, is getting, AI enabled. All of your office productivity tools are getting AI enabled. The massive spending in the cloud providers and the APIs and the constructs, that they're offering to developers now. There's going to be kind of we thought cloud computing and cloud based applications was a fast ramp. This is going to be freaking like crazy faster,
Yeah,
and I think all of that, we don't know how those workloads are going to now demand of the infrastructure. But I get the feeling that those who are still doing spreadsheet network lifecycle management are going to fail miserably in this
agreed.
new world.
Agreed.
And you've got to, like, and I really haven't thought much about what the concept that you brought up, and that was around automation to drive an outcome. My mind was still, I think, stuck around automation as a toil reduction, and then
No,
a way to get time back in your calendar. Where really you're thinking about is that you've got to be able to automate this thing so you can be dynamic and the infrastructure can be reactive and you get the outcomes that you really want. Yeah, that's
yeah, I mean,
great.
if your automation effort revolves around toil, that's great. You need that is something that absolutely needs to be done, but it should be a big warning sign on just how far behind you are.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay. Um, hey, that was so much fun.
Oh
I
yeah,
always have
always, Nick,
I always have a
always.
great time, chatting
Yeah,
with you. I tell you, I think it was like, that dinner that we were together with, 12 years ago. I don't know. I think that chemistry just kind of like stayed true over the last 12 years. It's
I,
like really been
I
wonderful.
I remember, you and two other guys were just sort of standing there, and I pitched this idea. You know what I mean? And two
Mm.
of the three of you were like, "Yeah, that's a terrible idea. We're not going to do that." And you were like, "This is a great idea." You're like,
Yeah, yeah,
if you're willing to sponsor that first one, I'm willing to put some wood behind the arrow. Like we could do this, right? And then
yeah.
it's funny. I probably this is probably mean spirited, but I don't mean it to be mean spirited. But every single person along the way that said that we didn't know what we were doing and our model was bad, that they
Yeah.
don't have conferences anymore. They're all gone.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's like, yeah, we're like 12 years we've been at it. It's like crazy, and actually it's like the fall, like registration is through the friggin' roof. We're tracking at almost 2x of last fall, you know. Um,
Woohoo!
just yeah, I think it's, if everybody shows up, I think it's going to be a really big meeting,
You heard it here first. If you don't show up, you're going to get your butt kicked. So you better show up.
It's so funny. I remember, like, in when we first came out in 2022, after the pandemic, you had a session. It was the last session of day two, and you were in a meeting, and you came out and you looked around, and it was like a third of the people were there. It's like two-thirds of the audience, and you were like, "Hey, where'd everybody go?" I
People
know,
had
like,
just spent the last 2 years at home. You know what I mean? Like we're lucky we even got them to come out.
I know. Yeah. No, that was great. Yeah. So anyway, I think we're going to have like a really great meeting. It was so funny. So for everyone, we're kind of talking about the first time Ernest and I met. It was at an ONS in Silicon Valley, and it was a private dinner that it was run by the organizers of ONS. It was like for speakers, and there's only like a handful of us. It probably had like, I don't know, 10 of us, in that room. So I sat next to the CEO of Samsung, and so high level guy. He didn't speak any English. And so it's like it was the longest dinner that I can remember being at. Super nice guy, really great facial expressions, but we could not have any conversation.
Yeah,
you know
that's crazy. And then you and I went off in the corner and had a great set of conversations. It was amazing.
Yeah, well, that was the genesis, of Onuk,
Yeah.
in that meeting. Yeah. So actually, we have we need to thank Guru, for that, just pulling that meeting together.
Yeah, I'll let you do that.
Okay. All right. Well, this was fun, Ernest. Again, thanks so much, for taking the time and being on the pod.
Thank you, Nick.
It was really great to have you, and thank you everyone for plugging in. And we'll see you all in Manhattan, October 23rd and 24th, at the summit. So see you then.
Thank you.